Alright, let's talk about this train station and why it might be bad news for Gojo fans, but spoilers beware. So let's talk about this. Is the train station his domain expansion, or is it more of a Gojo airport scene? If you saw my first video on this chapter where I talk all about Yuji, you'll know that I was leaning more toward it being the actual domain. Now I think I'm leaning the other way, that it's more akin to the airport scene. So that's what we're going to explore here. However, I'm still not sure, and it's for one big reason. And that is this editor's note, which says this decisive battle heads into an uncharted domain. That feels very intentional, and the kanji used for the word domain here is the same one used in domain expansion. So that does imply that we're headed into a domain, and obviously Yuji just opened his, so it makes sense, right? But even though that's the case, I do still think this might not be the domain, and again, could be more of a Gojo airport scene. So let's talk about why. And the first is something I talked about in my previous video. It's this obvious parallel to the airport Gojo scene and this Sukuna train scene. Gege used nearly the exact same composition. He was drawing a direct line between these two experiences. And in Gojo's case, he wasn't trapped in somebody's domain, right? He had just taken a lethal blow that Gege skipped over showing us and then put us here in this kind of limbo state, right? So similarly with Sukuna, even though we know Yuji just opened the domain, maybe he skipped over the actual domain and potential lethal blow to Sukuna and straight to this limbo state in the train station. The next interesting parallel here is the fact that Gojo in the airport is his younger, hidden inventory self. He is not the adult that got the 50% discount. This is similar to how we see Sukuna in his Yuji form. He is not in his Heian era form or even his Megami form, which is what he was in at the time of the domain expansion. Both of these situations allude to it not being objective reality. And the next big parallel is that both scenes obviously take place in a transportation hub. Again, an airport in Gojo's case and a train station in Sukuna's case. Both evoke departure to somewhere, right? But we're going to talk more about that aspect in a little bit. Alright, so that's the premise, okay? Now let's assume it's true, that this isn't the inside of Yuji's domain and instead is a similar type of airport scene. What can we glean from all of this if that's true? So in order to understand what these scenes are telling us, I think we need to rewind to a very important thing Nobara told us at the very beginning of this manga. How that there's this concept of only having so many seats open in your life and not wanting to let anyone who is basically undeserving of them sit down in them. And we can see a young Nobara who basically has no one in the seats in her life. But then in Nobara's final moments, where she's kind of having her own limbo-esque scene, we see her come to peace and actually tell Yuji, you know what, tell everyone I had a pretty good life. And we can see all of the people in her heart that took up those seats in her life, those that were most important to her and that she loved. Now let's compare this to Gojo's airport scene. Similar, in a moment close to death, he is surrounded by those that he loved who are literally taking up seats in this airport. And it's not just these ones pictured, right? We've also got Geto and Principal Yaga, and yeah, Toji, which is interesting, but I think this explains why he is kind of in the background and standing. He doesn't have a chair in Gojo's heart, but he was still a fundamental part of shaping who Gojo was. So he's there, but he just doesn't get a seat. Now let's apply these same ideas to Sukuna's train station, and what do you see? Nothing. It's absolutely barren, right? Not a soul in this train station has taken a seat in Sukuna's life. And that's by his own design, right? He has thrown everything away in the pursuit of his own selfishness and his own desires. He doesn't see the value in that type of stuff, right? He doesn't understand what love is. And yet there is one other person there, standing, not taking a seat, but Yuji, right? The one to teach you about love is... And this is especially poetic in light of what Nobara even says about Yuji back during that original chair scene. That, of course, there are also people like you who bring their own seat and sit down. Yuji basically worms his way in there. And so here, Sukuna, who would otherwise have no one, will now be accompanied by Yuji on this journey. And I'm not trying to imply that either Sukuna or Yuji will learn to legitimately love each other, but rather Sukuna will learn about what love actually is and what it means in light of Yuji's example. Not that he will like have a change of heart or anything like that, but he will rather learn the error of his ways and realize that he chose the wrong path in life. The one that will show you about love is Yuji. And we can trace this all the way back to the very first chapter with this burden that Yuji's grandfather placed upon him, basically telling him to help people whenever he can. And so Yuji is striving to give everyone that good death as he views it. And what is this good death? When it's your time to go, make sure you're surrounded by others. Well, let's think about that in light of these limbo afterlife scenes with the chairs. Maybe he doesn't mean literally like die in a hospital surrounded by your loved ones, but when you die, make sure your room is full of people who are sitting in your chairs. Now, assuming you're on board with me for all of that, what does this actually mean? Where are Yuji and Sukuna going on this train? And I can't tell you the exact shape it'll take, but for my money, this is going to be an exploration of Sukuna's character. Maybe via flashbacks, maybe via whatever, right? But we might find out why Sukuna is the way he is, why he chose a life of selfishness and pursuing his own desires as opposed to having a life filled with love that would have led to people filling the seats in his afterlife limbo scene. And Yuji, again, being on this journey with him may show him the other path that he never took, the one to show him about love. Now, will that mean anything to Sukuna? Will he actually change the way he views the world and realize that he did make a mistake? That I can't tell you, but that's the crux of the decision, which brings us all the way back to a point I skipped over in the beginning, why they're in an airport and why they're in a train station, a place that invokes departure. They are there to make a decision on where to go. North versus south. If you want to start anew, go north. If you want to return to your old ways, head south. If Sukuna is ready to realize the mistakes of his ways and realize there was another path he could have gone on, then he can go down that path and become somebody new by going north. However, if he's going to stick to his guns, then he'll just remain who he was and go south. And this is where the bad news for a Gojo comeback comes into play. Because as I'm sure you guys have seen in my Gojo comeback videos, I point to actual evidence in the manga. It's never come from a place of me just wanting him back. And most notably of that evidence is this moment right here. This question that Gege posed to us in Gojo's death chapter about potentially becoming someone new. Now, the thing is, I always viewed that question in light of Gojo and therefore expected an answer from Gojo, whether it be north or south. And thus far, I didn't feel a sufficient answer had been given to us for that question, hence why I thought there was a possibility of him coming back in some form or fashion. However, now we have another option for that question to be answered, and it's via Sukuna. Maybe the question was introduced via Gojo's situation so that we now can have it answered with Sukuna's situation. Sukuna may be the one we get to see choose north as opposed to Gojo potentially picking south, because in his afterlife scene, again, he does have people filling the seats of his life. So maybe he was able to make peace with his situation and decide he was okay being who he was. Sukuna could be the one Gege is using to show us go north. Now, if you saw my previous video talking about all of this, then you already know that this train station was modeled on a real-life train station in Iwate. However, what I didn't know then that I know now is the name of this train station, Kitakami. And here is a breakdown of the etymology of kitakami, and as you can see, most importantly here, it means north. Now, again, I'm sure contrary to what most of you would think, I am actually fine if this means Gojo doesn't come back as long as Gege satisfies these questions with Sukuna. However, I don't think this means it's completely Gojo-ver either, because I do think there's still possibility for Gege to show us more here. I think it's very interesting that he created this dichotomy between the two strongest, presented both of them with this option, and placed both of them in transportation hubs. So we may get to see an answer from both of them. But clearly the train station being called north and this chapter being called south is pretty damning. And one final thing I'll say on all of this is that we have seen two other afterlife limbo scenes as well, with both Jogo and Kashimo. And notably, neither of them were in a transportation hub. They weren't presented with the same option of departure to north or south. So that could be another clue that we actually will see an answer from both Gojo and Sukuna. And that's not to say that they'll both be north, but we could get more there. Also, interestingly, Sukuna was able to interject himself into both of these cases, even though he wasn't dead, so maybe Yuji isn't either. Anyways, there's a lot to think about with all of this, so please let me know your thoughts down below, and as always, thank you so much for watching.